And we're just gonna kind of get into the nitty gritty about that. How are you guys feeling about VQ mismatch? Still feeling pretty good? Like this? Yeah. You guys will be pros by the end of it, don't worry. Okay, gas transport. So remember, learning resources, make sure you guys are looking in your book, especially if you don't understand something, okay? But there are the pages that pertains to what we're talking about today. All right, so morning warm up. We're going to list some normal values here. Okay, who can tell me what the normal values, and it says PO2, but essentially that's PaO2. Who knows what the normal range is for PaO2? Anybody?
85.
Nope, you're 80 to 100. This is our oxygen in our blood. Normal is 80 to 100. So when we have an ABG and it's less than 80, we know that we have some form of hypoxemia, okay? All right, PaCO2. Sean, you were saying it.
Oh, the 35.
Yep, 35 to 45. 35 to 45.
Is it the MMHG that's a measurement or no?
For PAC, for our pressures, for anything that has a P, it would pretty much be the MMHG. Or centimeters of water pressure, depends on which one. And then pH, what's our normal pH range?
7.35 or 7.
Thank you. 7.35, 7.45. Which one is the more alkaline side? 4.5 or 3.5?
4.5.
4.5. Alkaline.
Let's see.
So then that means anything more this way is considered acidotic. Acid. We're going to talk a lot about that at the beginning of next semester. We do, first week is like, first week or second week is ABG interpretation. It's just like, boom, out of the gate. We just start off. And then you guys are going to be awesome professionals. Okay, hypoxemia. We kind of just talked about it. So we know this is our normal PaO2, okay? So if we are talking about hypoxemia, what are we talking about? What can be considered hypoxemia? So the lack of oxygen, would you say? In the blood, yeah, absolutely. And so they even kind of go a little bit further sometimes and talk about the actual desaturation of some of the hemoglobin. But yeah, it's a low amount of oxygen in the blood. And so how am I going to find out if someone's hypoxemic? I'm going to have to draw an ABG, and I'm going to look at that. We have mild, moderate, and severe hypoxemia, okay? So we will start to kind of talk about those things too. As far as hyperventilation, what am I talking about? Which one of these things are we talking about here? When I talk about hyperventilation, what am I going to look at? Yeah, the PaCO2 is really going to be what's going to tell us if we're hyperventilating. So hyperventilation, it means what?
Increase CO2.
No, so yeah, increased breathing, so it could be respiratory rate. You know, typically that's the one that the culprit is. We have a high respiratory rate. So hyper, meaning above, ventilation, being air in and out, remember? Okay? So usually we'll look at our PaCO2 to identify if we're hyperventilating, okay? So if I'm hyperventilating, I'm blowing off a lot of what? CO2. So what is it going to be? How is our CO2 going to be, high or low?
Low.
Low, okay. So we're going to be low. So that means that we're going to be on this side of our PaCO2, which actually is alkaline. Okay. All right. What about hypoventilation? Gonna be the exact opposite? You are right. So we're talking a low respiratory rate, right? So maybe our patient's fatigued at this point and now they're breathing really, really slow, okay, shallow. And what happens to our CO2 in that case? Are we blowing off as much as we were? No, we're not blowing off enough, okay? So then our CO2 is gonna climb, right? And it's gonna become more acidotic, okay? So hyperventilation is increased respiratory rate, blowing off a lot of CO2. Hypoventilation, decreased respiratory rate, and we are retaining CO2. What happens if you retain too much CO2? Are you a chipper? You're like, woo! No. They're really hard to wake up, right? They get really sleepy, okay? So that's when our patient is unarousable, right? So we go up and we're like, Mrs. Smith, and she's like, what? And then she kind of falls back asleep, okay? Not good, right? So we know we have too much CO2 on board. Okay. Oh, list 2 ways oxygen is transported in the blood. So I feel like you guys definitely know at least one way. Red blood cells. Red blood cells. What was the other huge component of our blood?
Plasma.
Plasma. Red blood cells and plasma are the 2 main ways oxygen is transported in the blood. All right. Now we got our brains going. If I can get this. All right, dissolved in the blood. So we're talking about oxygen transport. So oxygen is dissolved in the blood. That is how it's being transported through blank blood plasma. Blood plasma. So oxygen is dissolved in the blood plasma. That is how one way it is transported. Do you think the bulk of our oxygen transportation is in red blood cells or plasma?
I'm going red blood cells.
Yeah, you're totally right. Red blood cells, because remember, it has that heme that they're going to be binding to, right? And that's going to be the major player here. So if we say dissolved in the blood is plasma, a relatively small percentage of oxygen is transported in the form of dissolved oxygen. Small is the next blank. Okay, so next, we know it was plasma, the first one. What's the second one? It's bound to our red blood cells. The hemoglobin on our red blood cells. So it's bound to, you can say red blood cells, but also know it's hemoglobin, right? That it's actually bound to. Okay. And what do you think? We talked about it. It's most of the oxygen is diffused into the pulmonary capillary, rapidly moves to the red blood cells, and chemically attaches to the, most is the first blank. Most of the oxygen that diffuses into the pulmonary capillary, blood rapidly moves to the red blood cells and chemically attaches to the hemoglobin. And you can also, instead of writing it all out, you can say HGB, hemoglobin. And do you know how many hemoglobin are on our red blood cells that they can attach to? Anybody? It's under 5.
2.
Add 2 more.
4.
4, okay. 4. So there's 4 heme that they can bind to. So that is the last blank. A total of 4 oxygen molecules combined to each hemoglobin molecule. 4. Okay, and we talked about our normal blood gas values. I do have venous on here too. So remember, arteries, their goal is to pretty much transport this oxygen and deliver it to all of the tissues, right? So what happens at that tissue level is gas exchange, okay? So tissues are getting rid of CO2, goes into our bloodstream, and we're giving oxygen, okay? So then when we come back around, we should have a little bit of oxygen left over in our venous, okay? So normal oxygen is 35 to 45 within a venous. So if you do a VBG instead of an ABG, of venous blood gas, this should be, that would be your normal, okay? So that can still tell you a little bit that, you know, your patients are oxygenating okay. Now, if that comes back significantly high, do you think we dropped off enough oxygen to our tissues? No, it should be low. It should be 35 to 45. If it comes back and it's higher, I'm like, well, all the oxygen's just sitting here. Why didn't it get dropped off? Okay, so we can start to think about, okay, maybe our tissues aren't getting the oxygen that they need, that type of thing. So there's things that we can look at our VBGs to understand that. Now, I really won't test you on those values. I really want you to know the ABG values, okay? But this is a good reference for you guys to kind of see if you do, they're starting to really do VBGs in the hospitals, at least locally. So that's something you want to understand and not be like, oh my gosh, they're hypoxic because it's, you know, lower, and know that that's how it's supposed to be, so. And honestly, our pH isn't too far off either, right? So it's a little lower, but it's not too far off. So these are not too crazy, but our CO2 is gonna be higher, which makes sense, right? That's what we're taking, dropping off in our lungs, out to the air. Okay. And because we have more of it, guess what happens to our bicarbonate? It goes up to compensate, because this is our alkaline. So the more of it, the more alkaline our blood will become. So if one starts to increase, the other one starts to increase, or depending on which one, decrease to level up and kind of balance out that pH. So we'll talk a lot about that next semester. It's called compensation. That's kind of our, you know how your body always wants to have that homeostasis. That's kind of what it's always doing. It's trying to balance everything out. And so that's what our body does in the bloodstream, okay? All right, so now that we have all of this, we're gonna start talking about diffusion of gases. So diffusion, usually we're talking about across the membrane, right? So the movement of gas, diffusing, okay? So the movement of individual gases from an area of high concentration or pressure always goes from high to low. So the next blank, to a low concentration or pressure until equilibrium. Until everything's equal, then diffusion stops, okay? Until there's another change. So diffusion of gases. So this is just giving you a picture. We have water molecules, and we have dye. And you can see where the dye can start to disperse and diffuse into the water. So it goes from areas of high to low, okay, until it's all completely equal, and then the diffusion stops. So that's what's taking place in our capillary and alveoli, okay? We have that diffusion, so we have to have a pressure gradient there, right? That's what this is telling me. For that to take place in our lungs, there has to be a change in pressure, okay? So that's what we're gonna kind of talk about. So, in diffusion across the AC membrane. So this is our alveoli, this is our pulmonary capillary, okay? So each individual gas, so all of the, remember we have several gases within our alveoli, can continue to move independently from the other gas from a high pressure area to a low pressure. So when we look at this, you can see, if you can see, in here we have a PVO2 of 40 is our pressure, okay? So remember we talked about it. That's what we get in our VBG, right? We're looking at our PaO2, it's 40. Our PVCO2 is 46, okay? That's the pressure it's exerting within this pulmonary capillary, okay? And it's moving, and it comes in contact with our alveoli. We have a PaO2 of 100 millimeters of mercury, okay? And a PaCO2 of 40. So now we're looking at our pressure change. So let's take a look here. Within our capillary, PVO2, we have 40 millimeters of mercury, and our PVCO2 is 46. Okay, so then over here, our PaO2, our big A, was 100. And our P big A CO2 is 40. Okay, now we have all of our pressures out. So which one is high between the oxygen? Is it the PVO2 or the PaO2? The P big AO2 is bigger, right? It's 100. So that means we have a higher concentration here. So where is it going to diffuse into? The lower concentration into the pulmonary capillary. That's why oxygen diffuses. So there's a pressure gradient here, and there's a higher concentration of oxygen in the alveoli, and it's lower in the capillary. So it diffuses across that membrane and attaches to the hemoglobin, and then is delivered to the left side of the heart and then to the rest of the body. Okay? So that's what we want to take place, right? Okay. Now let's look at our CO2. Which one's higher, the PVCO2 or the PaCO2?
PV.
PV, it's 46, not much higher, but it's higher. So that means our higher concentration is in our capillary, and the lower is in the alveoli. So what's going to happen? It's going to go from our high concentration, that CO2, to our alveoli and blow out, okay? That's our pressure gradient. So that's how gas exchange is taking place. If we didn't have these pressure gradients, it wouldn't happen, okay? So that's why when we go to higher altitudes or we have lower altitude, when we go below sea level, that's why this transportation can kind of change, right? Because we have a different gradient, whether it be greater or less, okay? Does that make sense? How that bariatric pressure can actually impact gas transportation? Isn't that crazy? Our body does that. It's just nuts. I mean, that small little thing right there is how we breathe. My daughter asks me all the time, Mommy, how do we breathe? And I'm like, okay, well, it's pressure gradient. And she doesn't know. I'm just like, okay, yeah, I got it. And I'm like, all right, one of these days you will. So, understanding that that's what's taking place and why we have oxygen coming into our capillaries and it's not going the other way. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so my example is pretty much what I probably said. O2 and CO2 are diffused across the pulmonary membrane at the same time, and it's that change in our pressure gradient there. So the diffusion of O2 and CO2 continues until the partial pressures of O2 and CO2 are equal. So if you see over here, our PaO2 will becomes 100, and our PaCO2 becomes 40, which is what it was in the alveoli. So gas exchange stops, diffusion stops, because we're now equal to what is the higher concentration was. Does that make sense? We've hit equilibrium. All right. So diffusion transit time, meaning how long that time that we have to actually diffuse oxygen across that membrane, okay? So we're talking about the amount of time that transition is taking place. So in a normal, healthy adult, we should have a total transit time of 0.75 seconds. Okay? That's how long that whole process occurs throughout the lung. Okay? So, of course, we have reasons in a healthy adult, if we're exercising, that's going to change a little bit, right? So when you exercise, your blood's flowing, it's pumping, your blood pressure goes up, heart rate's increasing. It's going to increase or decrease that time, you think? Say it again. So you think the blood flow is going to be going, it's going to have more time to diffuse if your heart rate's increased? No, it's going to decrease. So now we have less time, okay? So we're going to just say less than 0.75 because it's going to vary depending on the individual. But less than 0.75, and this is a healthy adult, okay? But we still have equilibrium. There's nothing that's impeding it. This is normal. It's fine. You know, they're healthy. So we're not like going to go into cardiac arrest because of this, okay? Your body compensates and everything's fine. When it becomes an issue is someone that doesn't have normal lung function, or if there's a cardiac impact issue, that's going to happen. So our pulmonary diseases is a good example. So if you have someone that has a shunt, yeah, true shunt. Pulmonary edema, pneumonia. ILD is interstitial lung disease. Interstitial lung disease. And that's going to, that impacts the interstitial space between the AC membrane. If that's not how you spell interstitial, you didn't hear it from me. I don't know. That was me winging it. Okay. So this is pulmonary diseases. The time available to achieve O2 equilibrium in the AC membrane may not be adequate, okay? So that means because something's impeding that gas exchange, that doesn't mean this is going to change. Our transit time is the same. So if it can't if the equilibrium doesn't take place, it just keeps on moving. And now it has just less oxygen to provide to the body, okay? So if something's impeding it, that's what's going to cause that hypoxemia to occur, okay? So, therefore, it will not happen. What does this mean? What is it going to do to our PaO2? Yeah? Nothing? Is our PaO2 going to go up or down? Down. Down. So, it's going to decrease our PaO2, decrease our overall oxygenation, or oxygen in the blood, okay? So, because you have something in the way, pausing. So in this case, there's several different things. So the pulmonedema, pneumonia, this can be secretions, fluid, what have you. Pulmonary capillary interstitial lung disease is right here, kind of in that area, and it's caused like thickness. It makes it a little that space thicker than it should be or normally is. So now we have these issues to overcome, okay? Blood flow is the same, nothing's going on here, okay? But now it takes a lot more effort and time for that oxygen to go through all of this crap that's in the way, okay? So less diffusion takes place because it never reaches equilibrium, okay? So now we have a low PaO2, ultimately low PbO2, and it just keeps going around and around and around. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, moving on then, pressures, partial pressures. So that barometric pressure, it does put pressure on the chest. Barometric pressure. So our normal at sea level, which is where we are, is 760, right? You guys probably have this one somewhat down, this overall concept. So that is just the barometric pressure, and we add it with our pressure of inspired O2, okay? And then it kind of comes together to make our alveolar gas equation. So ultimately, those two are kind of put together to get this overall equation. So you don't need to know them necessarily separate, but you already do. So our alveolar gas equation, P big AO2, because we're talking about oxygen pressure in the alveoli, right? We're not inside the capillary at this point. Barometric pressure, 760, right, or whatever is given to you. PHO2, what is that usually? Pressure of water pressure.
47.
47 usually, right? So, and then times your FiO2 in percentage. So if you're on 60%, it's going to be 0.60, right? Not just the old 60. And then we're minusing our PaCO2. So we have to have that information to actually do this equation, right? So PaCO2, and then this is that respiratory quotient. So this is our VQ mismatch, right, that we were kind of talking about. So we have 0.8 there, okay? So this is normally 100, okay, if you're on 21%. So that's where we're at. But again, if you're not, then it makes it not quite as accurate. But it should be around that, that number. So this isn't any new information for you guys, but I want you to know that that's what we're starting here, okay? So make sure you guys can, I think on your worksheet it has some practice calculations for this. Okay, I do have a couple of laws that we're introducing. I know you're excited. And I've made like a little bit of a cheat sheet here for you guys that just kind of tells the difference between Graham's law and Henry's law. Okay, but also this is just a resource. So make sure you guys are also looking at the lecture. You can look in your book. But this is just a little bit about gas transport and the laws. So Graham's law. So this is talking about the diffusion rate, okay? The diffusion rate is directly proportional to the solubility coefficient, which is the pressure, so like depending on the pressure and the temperature, you think about something that can dissolve or dissipate within a liquid, right? So some of those things are going to impact that, right? If you have warmer water or whatnot. Oh, okay. Okay. So when we're talking about the diffusion rate and solubility, it is, Graham's law says, diffusion rate is directly proportional to the solubility coefficient. So the pressure and temperature normal is usually 760 and 37, which is in Celsius, right? So saying that that's normal of the gas, and indirectly proportional to the square root of the gram molecular weight of the gas. Clear as mud, right? Okay, so therefore, as a solute, so something that is, so that can be gas that we're talking about in this case, right? Going into the pulmonary capillary. A solute dissolve, as a solute dissolves, they become lighter and diffuse quicker, okay? So as it dissolves, and depending on how easily it does dissolve, it's going to become lighter and diffuse quicker. So lighter gases diffuse quicker. We know that, right? So what gas do we talk about that being that's a little bit lighter than oxygen that will, what's that? Heliox, yeah, so it's lighter, right? Also, CO2 is lighter than oxygen. Ooh, that's not good, right? So what does that mean? If CO2 is lighter than oxygen, is it going to diffuse faster? Yeah, so if you have a lot of CO2 coming in versus your oxygen, it's gonna beat oxygen to that hemoglobin and hop on board and take off, and oxygen's gonna be like, what about me? So what does this mean? It means that CO2 diffuses about 20 times faster than oxygen, okay? 20 times faster because it's lighter, so it dissolves and moves quicker. Or diffuses, I said dissolve, diffuses. So that's why it's important for us if we have like carbon monoxide poisoning, right? So when we have a patient that's exposed to a fire, so remember, that is going to diffuse a lot faster than oxygen. So that's what happens, is it gets to those hemoglobin, fills them up before oxygen can. So that's why when they come in, we need to pump them full of oxygen, okay? So we're just getting rid of all of that carbon monoxide, get it out of there, so that we can now, it's no longer there to jump on that hemoglobin, okay? Because it binds and then it's not letting oxygen to get on. Okay, so when we're talking about Graham's law, just know that we're talking about how light the gas is, and because it's lighter, it diffuses quicker. Okay, that's all it's saying. Now, it does depend on a couple of things, but I want you to just get the overall concept, right? So, but remember, the lighter the molecule or the gas, the quicker it's going to diffuse. And so this sheet is nice. It has clinical relevance on it too. So it does give you some critical thinking. So yeah, if you have someone that has a thickened membrane, kind of even just like that interstitial lung disease, it is going to impede any gas exchange, okay? So that does come into play. So think about that. So a thickened AC membrane reduces O2 diffusion ultimately and CO2 diffusion, okay? But O2 much more than that CO2. And I think we go through and talk a little bit about that. So, okay, so that's Graham's law. Let's talk about Henry's law. Okay, again, the top part I feel like is like the wordy, and the bottom, the red, I tried to say like this is kind of the summary so you kind of have a better understanding. So Henry's law states that the amount of gas that dissolves in a liquid at a constant temperature is proportional to the partial pressures of the gas. So what is he saying? He's saying, therefore, the amount of gas that's dissolved is based upon the direct relationship of the amount of pressure applied to the gas, okay? Because remember, we're talking about how much gas, we're talking about change in pressures, right? That's what's happening with diffusion. So remember, we had a low PaO2 versus the PaO2 that was here. So if we add even more pressure, it's going to just help diffuse it even quicker, right? So the more pressure, the greater the pressure gradient. Therefore, the more diffusion that takes place. What? I know. So, meaning the more partial pressure applied, the more gas is dissolved. So, AKA below sea level. So, do you remember hyperbaric chambers? And how if someone is having an oxygen crisis or if they need more oxygen to their tissues, we put them below sea level in a hyperbaric chamber. This is why. So more of that oxygen is being diffused across the AC membrane to help with overall oxygenation for that patient. What? I know. It's so cool. So cool. Okay. So that's what Henry's law is saying. Okay, so the more partial pressure you apply on that alveoli, the more of that oxygen is going to diffuse across the AC membrane and go into our blood. Okay? What's up, Krista? You got it, that look.
Because it's just saying, like, you know, a lot of it, because it's pushing it across, right? That's just...
That, and remember, we have a pressure gradient. It's not necessarily like positive pressure.
Well, right, but I'm just saying, yeah, because of the gradient, you know, yeah.
Yes.
No, yeah. No, I'm getting
Now,
what
there's
you're saying.
things that obviously can impede this, right? When we talk about our pulmonary diseases, but it's still going to help. So that's why we put patients in a hyperbaric chamber, especially if they have those disease processes, because this is only going to facilitate oxygenation.
Because of the pressure is what makes it, even in the chamber, while they're in the chamber,
Yeah.
because there's so much pressure, it makes it diffuse across.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
really, you're just putting them in there and you're just applying a lot of pressure to them.
Barometric pressure, so
Yeah.
not positive pressure. Like,
Right.
does that make sense? Because it's not like a ventilator.
Right.
It's just now we have a change in that
Atmos-
big PaO2.
Yes.
The barometric pressure. Okay. So then we just have a greater difference between our P little AO2 and our P big AO2. So then more of that oxygen is going to diffuse. Right? Okay. See what? So when it says clinical relevance, explains why increasing FiO2 improves oxygenation in hypoxic patients. This is your fact sheet. And then in hyperbaric oxygen therapy or hyperbaric chambers, it raises both pressure and FiO2, and so that increases that dissolving. And then it talks about oxygen toxicity and nitrogen absorption. But those are some nice little, like, put it together clinical applications. So, okay. Do we understand Graham's law and Henry's law? At the surface area, right? Just at the surface. That's all I want you to know. Okay. So laws governing the fusions combine Graham's and Henry's law. Okay. So when we're talking about Fick's law coming up, it's talking about the law of diffusion as well. So if gas diffuses through both liquid and gaseous phases in the lung, or gas does diffuse between those. Light gases diffuse more rapidly than heavier ones. We know that. Highly soluble gases diffuse through liquids more rapidly than less soluble. Oxygen is lighter, but CO2 is more soluble, so CO2 diffuses across the AC membrane 20 times faster. So this is just combining those two laws together to say this is how diffusion takes place, these two laws together. Boom. Okay, so now we're going to talk about surface area and Fick's law. Okay, so when we are talking about our alveoli, this is one of our alveoli clusters, sacs, okay? So when we're talking about Fick's law, I want you to think about surface area. So a decrease in alveolar surface area decreases the ability of oxygen to enter the pulmonary capillary blood. We know that, it's emphysema, okay? So what it's saying is, remember, we have all these clusters, just like that one. And with emphysema, the enzyme targets the elastase, whatever, within the wall, the tissue, okay? So it just starts to destroy and break down that entire cell membrane in the wall. So this all becomes one big alveoli, right? So we just lost all of that surface area where we were having gas exchange take place. So now we've significantly decreased the amount of oxygen that we can even deliver into the blood. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's all Fick's law is saying. So a decrease in alveolar oxygen pressure also reduces the diffusion of oxygen. So again, higher altitudes, less pressure. So what happens? Oxygen diffusion rate is just gonna slow down. It's not gonna be as quick as it was until your body gets used to that pressure and that altitude, okay? So that is pretty much what that's saying. Increased alveolar tissue thickness reduces the movement of oxygen across the AC membrane, okay? So number one is saying loss of surface area decreases the ability of oxygen to diffuse into the blood, aka emphysema.
You said loss of surface area
Correct.
decreases what?
The ability of oxygen to diffuse into, you can say, the blood or the pulmonary capillary, whatever is going to make sense to you. So ultimately, that's why our emphysema patients have a chronic low PaO2, right? Okay, so secondly, a decreased alveolar oxygen pressure reduces the diffusion of oxygen into the pulmonary capillary. So remember, what happens if we just went from a place of normal PaO2, because we had 100 here, right? P big A. And our capillary down here had, I think it was 40, P little a, okay? So this is our normal at sea level. Now we've gone to a higher altitude, so the barometric pressure drops. So now our barometric pressure, maybe our big AO2 is maybe 60. Our little a doesn't change. So now our gradient is significantly less. So the pressure being exerted on that alveoli is less. So then diffusion decreases, okay? So when you have a change in that barometric pressure, it changes the gradient that we have here, which just decreases the diffusion. It doesn't stop it, okay? It just decreases. So that's why patients feel like they're short of breath when they go into higher higher elevations. Now, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily hypoxic. It just means that the diffusion rate has slowed, okay? That they still eventually meet that equilibrium. It just takes a little bit more effort and it feels different in their lungs, okay? So it's not like they're dying. It's just that their bodies needs to get used to that barometric pressure, and so it will eventually feel normal to them, okay? But this is what's taking place, okay?
And that's at higher altitude.
High altitude, so high. So when you go up in the mountains, So then when we are below sea level, remember, we're like at crazy amounts of pressure.
I always have to think about it for a second.
It's easy. You would think that it would be the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
So just remember that barometric pressure is inversely related to high and low, if that makes sense to you. The mountains, the barometric pressure drops. Below sea, it goes up. Does this make sense? I mean, scraping the surface, but it makes sense that the greater the gradient, pressure gradient, the more diffusion you're going to have. It's even the same when we go on our ventilators, okay? Ventilation increases when you have a greater gradient, okay? Or a change in gradient. That's a little different, but okay. So all Fick's law is saying is that surface area, but also that what we already know, the change in alveolar pressure is going to decrease it. And then if you have that increased thickness, so pulmonary fibrosis gets really thickened, ARDS gets kind of that thick, beefy feel to it, it's also going to slow down diffusion time, okay? And so those patients may not get to equilibrium, unfortunately, okay? Because they have that pulmonary impairment. Okay. DLCO. Diffusion capacity of carbon dioxide. Who here has heard of DLCO? Have you guys talked about that in PFT stuff? You guys talked about PFT yet? Okay, so it's just talking about the diffusion across the membrane. That's all it's talking about, okay? So when we go into test the function of lungs, so next semester you guys are gonna go into PFT labs, sometimes they'll do this, okay? So it's a test that measures the amount of CO2 or CO that moves across the AC membrane into the blood. And it's really seeing how rapidly gas movement happens across the AC membrane, okay? And when we're thinking about this, I want you to think about they're testing to see if they have emphysema or some kind of diffusion impairment within the lung, okay? So if we come back and our PFT says, yeah, they've got COPD, we're like, okay, great. What kind of COPD? Yeah, a lot, like there's a lot, right? You think about CBABE. If they go and do a DLCO and they say, and their DLCO is low, you're gonna say emphysema, okay? Because all the other ones, they're not having a destruction of surface area, right? This is the only one that's gonna decrease your DLCO. So on your boards, they're gonna give you PFT results and you're gonna see that they're COPD and they're not gonna tell you, you're just gonna see it and you're gonna see that the DLCO is low too and you're gonna say, oh, that patient has emphysema, okay? So this is just telling you or showing you some pictures. So we have a normal AC membrane, everything's beautiful, we have all our blood vessels, our clusters look great, we've got our venous, arterial blood, gas exchange is beautiful, there's no issue, okay? When we have pulmonary alveolar collapse, atelectasis, you can see that we have the diffusion has decreased, our oxygen levels have decreased in that area where the atelectasis has taken place. Because we've lost that pressure gradient isn't occurring, right? So now we have a very low diffusion rate, if any, in that area, okay? What do we call that? What kind of VQ mismatch is that? Touchant, yeah, okay. You see this one up here, it's a thickened alveolar wall. So this is our fibrotic patient, okay? There's a thickening of that alveolar wall. You see how it looks thick and gross? Yeah, so that you can see also is decreasing our diffusion because it now takes a lot more time for that diffusion to take place, but our transit time isn't changed. It's still 0.75. So it's not allowing, blood's not gonna slow down and say, okay, get on here, you guys. So it's gonna continue on and it didn't happen like it should have. No equilibrium ever met or took place. Okay, emphysema. If you look at this, we have beautiful, look at all those capillaries all over. Those whole bunch of gas exchange potential, right? over here you can see the destruction of all of those capillaries. So that's surface area that's been destroyed. That's showing us how that is decreasing diffusion, okay? This one down here is frothy secretions in the interstitial space. So this is interstitial edema, so that space between that membrane. Again, it's gonna take a lot more effort, time for that diffusion to occur. So, and then pulmodema is within the alveoli, and that's going to also impede diffusion. And then this one's just saying pneumonia, so alveolar consolidation, same thing, okay? So these are nice little visuals for you to kind of understand, that makes sense. You just can't see it on there. If you go to Canvas, you'll probably see it a lot better. Okay, alveolar air equation. So we've already talked about this. This is the P big AO2. It's really just a calculation, God bless you, to determine the pressure of oxygen available in the alveoli. So we talked about this already. So our blood flow, the change in pressure gradient, and how that's contributing to our diffusion. And this is ultimately just saying the same thing that we had said. So why is this important? Understanding that pressure. It shows the pressure of oxygen available in the alveoli for gas exchange, and it shows the effect of variables on oxygen pressure in the alveoli. The pressure of oxygen available in the alveoli is a factor in the amount of oxygen available for gas diffusion across the AC membrane. That's just summarizing pretty much what we've been talking about the past few slides, okay? And how barometric pressure is going to, the more barometric pressure you have, the more oxygen is diffused. The less oxygen is diffused. Okay, so let's talk about, and this calculation gives us a good idea of how much is of that pressure and oxygen is available to be diffused, okay? And actually going into our alveoli. So remember, when we're talking about the respiratory exchange ratio, it's usually that 0.8. Normal for our big PaO2 is 100 on either 100% or 21%. And our PaCO2 of 40. So we know that this is our equation. I'm not going to go through it again, but I think we do practice it. So let's do one together. How do you guys feel with this one? Are you guys feeling pretty good? You guys feel pretty, do we want to go through these and do a practice though? Okay, perfect. All right, so the first one, our barometric pressure is 760. So 760, and then I'm going to subtract it from my pressure of water pressure, which is 47. Okay, what's our FiO2 for this patient? 21%. What's our PaCO2? 40. Okay. Let me know what you guys get. First we're gonna, well, I guess I'll walk through this one. So 760 minus 47 is 713, right? 713 times 21.20 or 0.21 is 153.41. Now we can come over here and take our 40 divided by 0.8, which is 50. So then 153 minus 41 should be 103.
I didn't get that for, what is 713 times 0.21?
Someone knows.
713 times 0.21 is 149.
149, okay. That's all right, 149 minus 50, what do we end up getting?
99.73.
99.73. So about 100, right? That's the normal patient that this is what it should be. It should be around 100 when they're on 21%, okay? So now, do the next one. It just changes some of the, so this one's gonna be 760 and still on 21%, but now our PaCO2 has increased to 75. So what is that gonna do? So all of this is essentially the same. Now we're just changing this side. 75 times 0.8. Oh, I'm sorry, divided by. Anybody got that one yet?
93.75.
93.75? Something wrong?
55.98.
So you got 55 point what?
98.
I got 73, but yeah, okay.
Well, that's
So about
'cause you didn't
55.
add the 0.73 to the 149. Is that why?
It was probably one of the decimals, yeah. Which is totally fine. If you put that down, I wouldn't count you off or anything. But about 55, right? So that's our big PaO2. So now this is our pressure. So it went from 100 down to 55. So did our pressure gradient increase or decrease? Probably. So if our alveoli was 100 and now it's 55, remember we're talking about the pressure in here. That's what this is giving us. And now our capillary, it's still the 40 or whatever it was, okay?
Increase.
So has our gradient it went from 100, which was normal, to 55. So are we gonna diffuse more or less? Less, because the pressure gradient is less. Now, we can still, say that.
Oh, it's not your question.
Oh, okay, so now we know that having that more CO2 has decreased our diffusion ultimately because of the pressure that it exerts. Does that make sense?
Say that again. More CO2.
So the greater the CO2, the less diffusion that's going to take place because of the changes in pressure, ultimately. Okay, I'll let you guys do the rest of them. The next one is just saying a low PaCO2. Because everything exerts a pressure, right? Everything exerts a pressure. I get done at 10. Unless you want to hang out and listen, you can listen to me lecture too. Talking about gas transport.
All the fun stuff.
Mm-hmm. You miss it, yeah. So I'll be done here soon. Sorry, I didn't know you'd be done that quick. Mm-hmm. What'd you guys get for C?
122.23.
122, okay. So did the pressure increase, decrease? Increased, right? We had an increase in that pressure. right, guys. What are you gaining from this? What are you seeing? What is it showing? What happened when our pressure, our barometric pressure went down? And we had a normal FiO2 and a normal PaCO2. Did our P big AO2 go up or down? It went down, right? So we already knew that. That's stuff we already knew, right? When we change our FiO2 to 100, and we have a normal, we'll say a normal barometric pressure, what did it do to our P big AO2?
Increases.
Yeah, it increased it, right? So that it increased that ultimately that pressure of oxygen being exerted in our alveoli, okay? We knew that would happen. We increase our FiO2, we're ultimately increasing that pressure that's going to occur in our alveoli, okay? And hopefully this isn't too crazy and we can have a good diffusion rate, okay? What about when we went to a barometric pressure that was extremely high and we had FiO2 of 100, so E, then a PaCO2 of 40, what'd you guys get?
42.3.
What'd you get?
418.3.
I think I got something more than that. What'd you guys?
2,183.
Yeah, 2,183. So that's crazy, right? The amount of pressure that's being exerted. So hopefully that's why we put them in that hyperbaric chamber to hopefully increase diffusion, ultimately with that increase in alveolar pressure from the oxygen alveolar pressure. Okay, if you didn't finish, that's okay. We're gonna move on. Okay, assuming normal PB, which is barometric, not bariatric, barometric pressure in room air, what effect do changes in alveolar ventilation have on PaO2? Which of the examples demonstrates that? So if we have someone that's on room air and a normal bariatric pressure, barometric, you guys, now I'm messing myself up. So if we have a PaCO2 of 75, our CO2, did it go up or down from 40? Up. So are we hyperventilating or hypoventilating? Hypo. We're not blowing off enough CO2. Okay. So it's saying, and what did our ultimately our where'd we go? What happened to our pressure? It dropped. Okay. So we're not ventilating enough. So we're not getting enough, getting rid of CO2. So what is ventilation? What impact does ventilation have on our PaO2? Depending on it, yeah. If we are breathing faster, it's going. If we breathe slower, obviously, it's going to decrease our PaO2 ultimately, which could decrease our diffusion. Right? We're not breathing enough. We're hypoventilating. So a lot of that ventilation isn't getting even down to our alveoli. Okay, so that's what's happening. So ventilation impacts our P big AO2. Okay? So then what happened when we blew off too much? So that would be C. It actually increased our P big AO2, right? Yeah. So if ventilation increases, so does our alveolar pressure. If ventilation decreases, God bless you, so does our alveolar pressure, oxygen pressure.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
So if ventilation increases, meaning we're blowing off more CO2, it increases our PaO2. Okay.
I thought I missed something.
No, it's okay. What effects do changes in barometric pressure have on PaO2? So we know that the higher the barometric pressure, the higher the P big AO2, alveolar PaO2. Therefore, the lower the PaO2 is going to be, P big A. And the examples were B, C, and F, just so you know. So then, what effect does increasing the FiO2 do? So we went to 100%. What did that do to our PaO2? decreased it, right? So the higher the FiO2, the higher your P big AO2 is gonna be. Okay? Because remember, we're talking about the pressure the oxygen's exerting on the alveoli. So if we add more oxygen, there's gonna be more pressure from that gas on the alveoli. Okay? So if we decrease our FiO2, which we only go down to 21%, it should be fine and normal, but if it's not, if we have some kind of impairment, it's going to decrease ultimately our P big AO2. Okay. Exposure to the lung, exposure of the lung to 100% oxygen for greater than 24 hours can lead to oxygen toxicity, right? We've talked about that. Yet astronauts can breathe 100% for days or weeks when in space without suffering harm. How is this possible?
Pressure.
The pressure. There is no pressure, right? There is essentially no pressure up there. So the diffusion of that oxygen is not happening or occurring at a fast rate. So they don't get that oxygen toxicity. Does that make sense? Isn't that insane? It's just craziness. Absolutely crazy. Do you guys feel smarter? I mean, you're so smart. A lot of people don't know this crap, right? Okay. Clinical connection. So look at an example F. If this patient were being transported to surgery while being ventilated with a manual resuscitator like an ambu bag, what lesson should be learned? Okay, so we're looking at F. We have a PaCO2 of 65 and an FiO2 of 100%. So if we are bagging that patient and we're the one that's pretty much determining the rate, right, and the volume of that patient. So what lesson should be learned? If we have someone that we're bagging down to the OR and they're on 100% normal bariatric pressure, CO2 in this case is a little elevated. We want to make sure that we are not over-ventilating and not under-ventilating our patient, right? Because we know ultimately that pressure is going to impact diffusion of oxygen immensely, right? So F, you can see that we have under-ventilated that patient. We'll say that that's the case, okay? So now we have an increase in that alveolar, a big P AO2, but that's not necessarily good either, right? We don't want too much of that because we can get oxygen toxicity too, right? And some of that washout. So we need to be sure that we are ventilating at an appropriate rate, as I guess is what you would want to learn about bagging your patient to OR, okay? Adequate ventilation when providing an FiO2 is essential. Okay, so AA gradient, and that's supposed to be a little a, but it won't let me do it. So we're talking about the difference between our PaO2 and what is in our blood, the P little AO2. Have you guys done that yet? Yay, nay? Mm-hmm. No? Okay, great. So you have to have this information to get that. So we're taking what oxygen we're providing at the pressure of it, and we're ultimately seeing how much is diffused, how much got in there, okay? So why would I care about that? What is that gonna tell me?
Say it again.
If I take the difference between the oxygen pressure that's in the alveoli and the oxygen that actually crosses that membrane into the capillary, what number, if that number is, off, what is that telling me about that AC membrane, the alveoli? So there's something impeding diffusion, right? So what could be impeding diffusion in the alveoli?
There's no
Pneumonia?
Lung diseases.
I need more than that. Pulmonary edema, atelectasis. So these are things that we've been talking about. The VQ mismatch, right? We're talking about shunt here. So this is going to tell me if I have a shunt happening. Okay? So this is huge, right? And it's really simple. Once you get your P big AO2, you just subtract it from a number that's given to you, the P little AO2. Okay? And that's going to tell you how well the diffusion rate is, how well you're diffusing oxygen across that AC membrane. What? That's huge. Okay? So, as far as and you'll see this written as that. You see how it has a D in front of it because it's talking about diffusion. The D, and then it will have A, little a. So, and then O2. So diffusion of that. Make sure you're able to recognize that because it's not always going to say P big A O2 minus P little a O2. I just want you to know that. There's a few ways to write this. So if you ever see it like this, it means that. It's just a different way of writing it because the D stands for diffusion, the difference between the two, and oxygen. Okay, so normally breathing room air, you should have less than 10 torr difference between those two. That's not a lot, right? You should be getting in your blood what is being provided to you. If you have normal lungs at a normal pressure, everything's going the right way. Anything greater than 10 torr indicates a shunt. You guys, it's awesome. Isn't that awesome? So why is this important? It shows the difference between the pressure of oxygen available in the alveoli and what via gas exchange is in the arterial blood. That's huge. So if I have a big PaO2, we'll just say that this person's normal. We'll say 100. And we'll say our PaO2 is 80. How about we do, that's a little lower than I want to be. How about we do 90? 100 minus 90 is 10. 10 torr, okay? Is that normal? Yeah. Anything greater than 10 would be abnormal, okay? And you would say that there is some kind of a shunt, okay? Some kind of a shunt. Okay. We'll just start talking a little bit about oxygen transportation, and then we'll probably have to cut this off. But we talked about transportation of oxygen earlier. What were the two main ways? Yeah, so plasma and RBC or hemoglobin, which however you want to write that.
What was hemoglobin? HGB?
Mm-hmm. Yep, HGB. Okay, so the first part is physically dissolved in plasma. And this is going to be part of the equation that we're talking about. So the equation that we will eventually get to by the end of this lecture, one of them, is the carrying capacity of oxygen. So this is how much oxygen can actually even be carried in the blood, okay? Because we need to know that, right? That's kind of telling us a big deal. It's a big deal. So, so we get this by multiplying the PO2 by this 0.003. And that is part of that equation. So that's just telling you where that number's coming from when we get to that equation, okay? So you can see that we have red blood cells, but a good portion of our blood is plasma, right? So oxygen is dissolved in that plasma, but it's still not as much as we carry on our red blood cells. So the main one that carries our bulk of our oxygen is attached to that hemoglobin, okay? So every red blood cell contains approximately 280 million molecules of hemoglobin, okay? So we have a red blood cell, okay? And inside of it are all these little hemoglobin that are carrying our oxygen, okay? And this is what they look like if you blow them up. essentially. And on this hemoglobin, there are 4 heme molecules where oxygen can attach, okay? So, this is the structure of hemoglobin that is within the red blood cell, okay? So, the rings, they're an iron atom. I mean, that's fine, but that's why we have like albumin and things like that in our blood. That helps with, the protein helps with carrying some of that, and why iron is a big part of, patients that are anemic. Because iron, it needs to be in our blood for this to really occur and to have all these hemoglobin, okay, and red blood cells. 4 molecules can combine with each hemoglobin molecule. So each one of these hemoglobin within the red blood cell can carry 4 oxygen, okay? That's all that's saying. So the 4 chains are held together by chemical bonds, and there's like alpha, beta, that kind of stuff that's really going to keep and hold on to that bond. So it undergoes structural changes when it reacts with oxygen and becomes oxyhemoglobin. Okay, so HbO2 is what it, once oxygen attaches, it's HbO2 now, okay? So, at 100% saturation, meaning all of our hemoglobin are saturated, and all 4 of the rings here are saturated, or all 4 of those rings are saturated, it is going to give a 1.34 mil of oxygen, which can be combined with each hemoglobin. So that's, again, part of that upcoming equation. So that's why I'm telling you these little things. So this is part of that equation coming up. Okay. So that's if you're 100% saturated. If you're not, it's going to change, right? If for some reason you don't have 100% saturation, that SaO2 that we talk about when we get our ABG back, that's the saturation of hemoglobin within the blood with oxygen, okay? So if that's not 100%, that number will change. So O2 bound to hemoglobin is our hemoglobin, how much oxygen is bound to our hemoglobin is this. Hemoglobin content, so just your hemoglobin level, so you'll be given that information, and multiply it by 100% saturation, which would be 1.34, and that's going to tell me how much oxygen is bound to my hemoglobin. That's big, right? We need to know that, and that will tell us how well, how much capacity our body can carry that oxygen with our hemoglobin, okay? So that right here is half of that equation. So pretty much having our hemoglobin level, and we multiply it by the saturation, which is typically at 100%, at 1.34. Okay. When we talk about hemoglobin, there are some different ones, okay? So when we are talking about adults, they have 2 alpha and 2 beta chains, and they compromise 94 to 95, comprises of 94 to 95 of total hemoglobin in the normal adult. Now, when it comes to our adult hemoglobin A, I feel like this gets a little bit deep, but there is an A2 adult hemoglobin, and it has different chains, and we have less than 3% of that hemoglobin total in our body. So 2 alpha, 2 delta chains. Mainly we have 2 alpha, 2 beta chains. And that's just telling you, remember the hemoglobin that we were, the heme of the hemoglobin? They had those iron molecules. It's just telling you what the chains that are connecting all of these. Some of them are alpha, some of them are beta, some of them are alpha, some of them are delta. And that's just differentiating between the type of normal hemoglobin we have in our body, okay? The one that we have the most of is this normal adult hemoglobin, and then the hemoglobin A2, we have like 3% of that total, okay? But when we talk about, ultimately, we're talking about all of them. So an adult male, a normal, is about 14 to 16 grams per 100 mils of blood. Females, 12 to 15. And then average infant is 14 to 20. So those are just what we should have when we get our hemoglobin results back. It should be around those ranges. So when you guys are doing your patient assessments, you may have seen hemoglobin, right? And then they usually have just an overall general range for males and females, which would cover both of these. And you can see if they have a normal amount of hemoglobin. And why is that important? Why do we care? What's important about hemoglobin? Carries oxygen. So if we have a decreased amount of hemoglobin, are we going to have a decrease in our oxygen ultimately? Yeah. So that's kind of huge, right? So when we talk about our patient assessments and you see someone that has a decrease in hemoglobin, you're kind of like, well, like what's causing that? Because that's kind of a big deal. We need to figure that out. If they have a decrease in red blood cells, what's going on? Are they anemic? Do they have blood loss, right? There's some things that will cause it, maybe some medications. So we need to look at that because it is kind of a big deal to us. Okay. This isn't too bad, but fetal hemoglobin is a little different, meaning in utero, right? Okay. So when we talk about our fetal hemoglobin, we're going to start talking about the oxygen dissociation curve. Have we talked about that a little bit? Shifting and things like that? Okay. So when we're talking about our fetal hemoglobin, they have 2 alpha, 2 gamma chains. You're like, what? Where are all these coming from? And those are produced in utero. So at 36 weeks, the bone marrow begins a production of the hemoglobin A that we talked about. That's that normal one versus the A2. At birth, a full-term infant has 70% of their type F hemoglobin, that fetal hemoglobin, okay? So the one that has 2 alpha and 2 gamma. So it slowly decreases the amount of that weird fetal hemoglobin it has going on, and it's starting to transition into what we normally have, okay? So by 1 year of age, they have less than 5% of that F fetal hemoglobin. So it does take quite a while, okay? But what's different about the fetal hemoglobin is that it's not going to have the same amount of PaO pressure that's exerted on it that oxygen can actually get on. I don't know how to say that. When we talk about the shifting of our oxygen dissociation curve, we talk about like lefty loves and righty, what did I say? I can't remember. Righty flighty, I think is what I said. Okay, so when I say lefty loves, it means that our oxygen is going to stay on our hemoglobin and it's not going to get rid of it and let it go to the tissues or whatnot, okay? So when they're in utero, they have that kind of mentality. They don't need to worry about oxygenation as much because they're getting a lot of nutrients and things like that from mom. So they don't need to worry about a lot of that. And they have that weird fetal hemoglobin. So it's shifted to the lefty loves, and it's fine, okay? But over time, we need it to shift back to the normal hemoglobin where we're releasing some of that oxygen to our tissues and things like that. So that's why it takes, it's that slow progression, but that's what the difference is in our fetal, in utero with our fetal hemoglobin. They have a shift to the left. Which we'll talk a little bit more about the shifting of that oxygen dissociation curve. But they're just kind of having they're holding on to their oxygen, and that's what makes this hemoglobin different and why we don't want them to continue to have it, okay? So that's pretty much all that is saying. And again, we'll get into all that fun stuff. Okay, hemoglobin types. So we have hemoglobin S as well. So we're still talking about hemoglobin, but now we're talking about abnormal. What we said before was technically normal. Even the fetal one was normal for them, right? This is abnormal, okay? So when we talk about sickle cell, that's the hemoglobin S that we're talking about, okay? So genetic beta chain defect, and they're more susceptible to clotting. So it typically is seen in African Americans, like 8 to 11%. So that's usually the higher population. But it's not, that doesn't mean it's only that population. But we call it the sickle cell disease because of the hemoglobin S that is happening, I guess. So you can see these are normal red blood cells. Our sickled red blood cells are not that nice donut shape, okay? So they tend, instead of like being able to get into some of those small places because they're that nice circle shape that kind of can be condensed down to size or squished together, I guess. These tend to get stuck, form clots. And that's unfortunately one of the signs of having this type of hemoglobin. So it forms long, inflexible chains. So when you see these red blood cells, I mean, they're a circle, but they are super flexible. So they can like be squished and pushed and go through those tiny capillaries, and it's completely fine, okay? These are not, they're not as flexible, and they're just not that more easy to shape to get through some of those tight spots. So they tend to have a lot of clots, unfortunately. But oxygen, the hemoglobins get clumped, you can kind of see in there. And so the oxygenation process also can be impacted because they don't have all of their heme, okay? So unfortunately, that is one type of the abnormal hemoglobin. There's also hemoglobin M, which is our met hemoglobin. And this is when we have iron, when the iron groups have changed from furious to ferric and cannot transport oxygen at all. So remember, we talked about there being those iron molecules on our hemoglobin. They have now changed, and the iron that's on there cannot transport oxygen. So what happens? Those met hemoglobin aren't transporting oxygen, okay? So the red blood cells that are there, the hemoglobin that are normal, are the only ones that are going to be carrying that. Now, what can cause this is usually from a deficiency, chemicals, from drugs, chemicals, nitrates, sulfamides, or acetaminophen, from a deficiency of the methemoglobin reductase, which is something that reduces that amount in the red blood cell. So ultimately what I want you to know is methemoglobin cannot transport oxygen, okay? And it occurs because of the change in iron on the red blood cell or on the hemoglobin. That's really all I want you to know and understand. It does have a brownish color. So when it you know how we have this pinkish hue because of our blood and whatnot, it actually tends to give the skin a blue color, okay? So there was a case of the blue people down in, what was it, Kentucky? Yeah, Kentucky, where there was a lot of mountain incest going on. These, it was, but there was someone that had this methemoglobin, and they passed down that DNA, and so each one of them ended up having a bluish hue. So at one point they had brought someone into the hospital, and they were all like, what is going on? There's like the Smurf family here. And they were, so I was told that this is not the right picture. Oh, there it is, I updated it. This is a picture of the blue people from Kentucky. So it is a real thing, and it was because they, their two blue people were in the same family, and unfortunately procreated. So, but that was a true story, and it was the Fugate family, and it was like into like the 70s or 80s, I feel like that whole thing was going down. But anyway, so their bodies pretty much adapted and we're okay with that. But usually you die from having too much methemoglobin because you can't carry oxygen, right? So once you start to have all of that type of hemoglobin, you are unfortunately at risk for dying. So how do we treat it? We give them methylene blue, and that is actually the treatment for that. Where are we at? Okay. Is this the last one? This is the last abnormal type. Okay, carboxyhemoglobin. So this is when CO combines with hemoglobin. Again, usually it's 200 times faster or 20 times faster than oxygen. Oxygen that is attached to hemoglobin stays on longer, so the affinity is increased. And so we also have that CO2 that's on there that's not allowing for oxygen to bind. And so what happens is none of our tissues are getting oxygen. And ultimately we have hypoxemia. But are our hemoglobin saturated? Yeah, they're fully saturated, but with the wrong molecule, okay? So what do? We give them 100% oxygen, and that usually will eventually kick off that CO2, and it will shift that oxy-dissociation curve over, and it will now be within the normal limits, provide oxygen to tissues, and start having oxygen combined with hemoglobin, okay? So what patients are these? Fire victims, right? Absolutely. Okay, and that's our blue people again, just in case you guys were. All right, so we'll pick up here next. This is that equation that we talked about. So remember, this is the 0.003. What was that? Was that the hemoglobin or the plasma? The plasma. Remember, that's where this piece comes from. And then this 1.34 is the saturation of hemoglobin, right? So you will have to just memorize this. We'll go through it again and we'll do practice ones, but they're on your homework as well. So
We're gonna know that for the quiz, for a quiz.